I'm Roberto Unger, and I speak as a complete outsider because I'm neither a physicist nor a cosmologist, nor indeed any kind of scientist. But I do want to speak in the spirit of Neil's invitation to exploit contradictions in our present ideas. So there are two ways of approaching the problems of time that have been invoked here in this conversation. First, there are general philosophical doctrines, like those of Aristotle and Bergson, that are parasitic on our experience of time. Now, we might regard it as a calamity for our experience of time to be completely undermined and denied by science, because then we would have no way of translating the discoveries of science into a discourse intelligible to us. On the other hand, we think it's the business of science to criticize and revise our experience. And so we properly rebel against these philosophical doctrines. So this approach was mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, only to be dismissed. Then we have a second approach, which is to fix on some local physics, such as statistical mechanics or electrodynamics or even quantum mechanics. It may be a physics about fundamental phenomena in some sense, but it is a physics that was designed always from the outset to explain regions of experience and not the universe as a whole. It seems to me, looking at the conversation as an outsider, that the almost totality of the interventions here have followed this tack of trying to extrapolate a local physics by scaling it up into a cosmological idea. Then we run into insurmountable problems. First, and basically, because the universe is one of a kind. These local physics are designed to explain recurrent phenomena. Then, in order to fix the resulting problem, we have to stipulate some accidental initial condition, like the low entropy state, or we have to stipulate some dogma that somehow imposes time on a world that is alien to it, like the so-called past hypothesis. This seems to me to be a hopeless enterprise, and less a promising road to scientific discovery than a declaration of intellectual failure and surrender. So then we would have a third possible approach, which is to look for a properly cosmological argument. Now, the best candidate that we have for a cosmological theory in the strict sense is general relativity. But it seems hard to square general relativity with the historical character of the universe. Indeed, it was formulated right before the discoveries that led to the definition of the standard cosmological model. And it seems to be susceptible to reconciliation with a historical view of the universe, only if subject to a radical reinterpretation. So that seems to me to be the problem. And I don't understand why it is that we are all persisting in this second approach, as I described it, which seems to me to be entirely unpromising as the point of departure for a cosmological view. Thank you. Just a different take on this intellectual program that Lee has outlined. His emphasis has been methodological. Mine will be substantive. And I propose to state it in a straightforward, natural, pre-scientific language, the better to make clear its intentions. Let me begin by saying what this program is not. It is not a defense of our experience, in particular our temporal experience against science. It has never been hard to reconcile an influential scientific theory with our experience. For 200 years, a dominant influence on psychological and political theories was Newtonian mechanics, to the entire satisfaction of the contemporaries, imagining that social regimes and even constitutions could be conceived as mechanical devices designed by a Newtonian engineer. Let me give you an example. In our experience, the now has a special place. That's all we have right now. But for nature, the now enjoys no special status. If anything is real in nature, what is real is the process of transformation, which cannot be captured within the instantaneous moment. The only qualification to this refusal to defend experience is that we must not undermine experience so radically that the discoveries of science can no longer be translated into a language intelligible to us in the light of our experience. So first, the substantive program. The first proposition in the substantive program of this alternative is that there is no basic structure of the world and no permanent set of regularities, laws, symmetries, and constants exempt from change. Now, that there is such an exemption is the central idea in the dominant tradition of physics, from Galileo and Newton on, and indeed in the dominant tradition of Western thought since Aristotle. So this tradition affirms the reality of time only in a very qualified way, because it imagines that the basic structure of nature and its basic regularities are outside of time. We propose to deny that exemption in this program, and to imagine a world in which everything changes sooner or later, including the basic constituents and the fundamental regularities of nature. The second proposition in this substantive program is that for the reality of time to be radically affirmed, it cannot be that the universe has only a collection of local histories and no global or cosmic history. It must, in principle, be possible to place every event that has ever occurred in the history of the world on a single timeline. Now, whether it is indeed possible to do so depends on facts of the matter. It is not something that we can infer from a mathematical or metaphysical rationalization. For example, it may depend on whether the universe is so arranged that it supports the existence of a preferred state of rest or a class of fundamental observers who are situated in the world in a position that is relatively neutral with respect to certain criteria, such as the temperature at which the microwave radiation background strikes them, or the speed at which the galaxies recede from them. So this second proposition in the substantive agenda opens a horizon of empirical and experimental discovery. The third proposition in this substantive program is that the way in which nature presents itself to us in the cooled down universe that we observe, with its discriminate structure and its relatively stable regularities, is not the only form that nature may take. In the very early universe, or in extreme situations later on in the history of the universe, this discriminate structure may be melted down, and the regularities from being stable become unstable. And even the distinction between laws and states of affairs may begin to collapse. It is a fundamental mistake, according to this point of view, to universalize our temporally provincial experience of nature, when everything in our discoveries about the universe of the history should advise us to do the opposite. Now, I want to complement this outline of the substantive program with a few methodological observations. The method is entirely subservient to the substance. The first methodological principle regards the relation between causes and laws. In this view, contrary to the dominant tradition in the history of modern Western thought, causation is a fundamental feature of nature, rather than a projection of the human mind. And we think that rather than our causal explanations being based on laws, the causal relations sometimes exhibit and sometimes do not recurrent law-like form. The second methodological principle has to do with the relation between history and structure. We think in this point of view that structure is derivative from history rather than the other way around. And that is the only way in which it can be in a historical science. The third methodological principle has to do with the relation between the local and the global. Cosmology should not be practiced as scaled-up local physics, but has to proceed on fundamentally different methods. And the fourth methodological attitude is a hostility to metaphysical and mathematical rationalism in natural science. The most important attribute of the universe is that it is what it is, and not something else.